Hey, 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 what is going on, RoK Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today we are actually going to be taking a look at the top 32 Imperium Kingdoms, what's the current rank for them, which kingdoms kind of fall at the top and bottom, and then the second part, and this is probably going to be the more important part, really, that's going to focus on the bulk of what we'll be touching on today, is how does their Zone 3 distribution look like? I always find it fascinating. I love collecting data. I love even more so looking at trends. I think that's very important when we consider how are we going to go about managing our kingdom? How are we going to go about setting it up, developing it? What are different approaches and different styles that we can look at to see what we may consider applying to our own kingdom? The most important thing you may always hear me talk about, at least one of the most important things, I believe, is that no kingdom is always going to be managed the same way as another. And that to me has always been one of the most unique things that I've loved about kingdom builders, in this case, RoK, and how you can play your kingdom along, try different things, see what works, you apply things because from your past experiences. I think this is really what makes unique kingdoms, and more so individual kingdoms, having that opportunity to be different and to probably even to a next extent, be successful in their own way, right? Whether they're doing something exactly the same as another, slightly different, or completely different. I love that fact about how we can play these types of games. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and we'll switch over here to my stat page that we ended up taking some really cool stats from. So we're going to go ahead and just do a little reveal here. So these are your top 32 Imperium Kingdoms here in RoK, right? You got 1960, 1307, right? They're actually still the same, I think, from about a week ago. You got 1307, 1412. Again, some of the kingdom stats here, along with specifically the imp rank and the kingdom number, were collected, or I should say sourced, from rockboard.com, which is RoKBOARD, if I can spell correctly, rockboard.com. Obviously, I have to give them a big shout out because if I just ever need to go and look at some of the Kingdom Imperium power rankings and I just need to pull a quick top 32 list, I can effortlessly go and do that there. And I also have a link to their stuff in the bottom, along with, and I don't think I did my little spiel yet, but if you enjoy the content, make sure you sub, like, ring the notification bell, and if you want to be part of our conversation, hit up the Discord. You can find a link to that in the pinned comment description down below. Okay, so you can see these are the ones that are kind of rounding out our top set: 1960, 1307, 1412, 1254, 1302, kind of round out your top five. Then you got your bubble position here, 1916, 1002, 1079, right, kind of rounds out the bottom three. And again, right, this is how your top 32 looks. Now, some of the interesting things, and I always love, you see, we'll get to some of the stats later in a minute. But you can see here that when you're looking at the Zone 3, so let me define this. Zone 3 distribution is essentially defined by an alliance if they have built in Zone 3, right? It doesn't matter if they have one flag, two flags, three flags, right? If they have built in Zone 3, they are being counted for this, right? So I just have to preface that with the criteria. Then you have the amount of, based on the amount of alliances that have been allowed to build in Zone 3, right? How many of those alliances are touching LT? And then we have the Zone 3 distribution. And what this means is, how does the territory distribution look like? Is it more equal? Is it more not equal? Meaning that the range for equal to not equal could be, it's pretty much equal, even if it might be a couple flags off or a couple territory spots off, or it's pretty much equal at that point, right? Or it nearly is. And obviously, we don't have like a spectrometer or anything like that, or some, fancy gadget to really do all that outside of, we could count flags, for example, but that takes a lot of time. And then we have not equal, and not equal is defined by an imbalance or a disproportion, territory or space. Now, there are some kingdoms that fall on not equal that are closer to equal, but they're not as close as a kingdom that I would define as equal, even if they're not exactly equal, right? Whereas I could put a kingdom as equal that might have a few flags difference compared to another alliance, and they would be very, very close, But not equal would be they might have 10, 15, 20 flags difference, right? So even though they might be getting closer to equal, they still fall on the side of the fence that is more to not equal. Just to, again, kind of give you some parameters there. And we, as I mentioned, we're going to take a look at a couple kingdoms to give you some examples as well. So to kind of break down some of the stats that I found was very interesting, right? So let's kind of start top down before we get into showing you some visual examples from some of the kingdoms here. So you have the first one, which is how many of the Zone 3 alliances, or how many of the kingdoms, right, are touching LT, right? So where it has all Zone 3 allies are touching LT. What this means is that how many kingdoms are where all the alliances in Zone 3 are touching LT, right? So an example would be like this one here, where you can see in like 1254, right? They have 5 alliances in Zone 3, but they also have 5 alliances touching. You can also see that their Zone 3 distribution is near equal. And I said, we're going to give you some examples and show these. So 41% of the 32 Imperium Kingdoms have it where all of the Zone 3 allies are touching LT. On the opposite side of that, 59% of the kingdoms are not touching LT, right? Where not all of the Zone 3 allies are touching LT. I thought this was interesting. The kingdom range here for Imperium Kingdoms currently, right? And this can change pretty often, almost week to week. But you have 1,002 to 2,249. That's a 1,242 kingdom difference. That is a wide, gnarly range, given that, let me see, the newest kingdom currently, right, and I know you guys can't see this right now, but the newest kingdom currently is 2,879, right? So you're looking at here 28,635, right? Newer kingdoms or younger kingdoms than 2249, kind of at that bubble for the kingdom range position. But still, that's a wide, wide range. But I think it also shows the fact, and especially when you even have a kingdom as young as 1002, right? Which is what the... Again, I'm not sure if they have it, if it goes down to 1,000. Someone might have to correct me on that. But if not, I mean, what? That's the second kingdom, technically, if there wasn't a 1,000. I'm actually shocked right now. 1,003. Oh, man, I don't know if I can view the list here. I'd have to, like, really go. I don't really know how to test that. 1,071. Yeah. I might have to look at this for a while to see exactly what. But still, I mean, you're looking at one of the youngest, right, one of the first kingdoms, plural, they're in the game that started off. That, to me, is shocking in that sense. And I think when you look at how you can have this wide range of Imperium Kingdoms, I think that speaks a lot, where there's not a tight cluster that you have where it's, maybe it's 1,200 to 1,700 as an example, right? I think it's great that you can have newer kingdoms that can easily make it. I mean, I remember once upon a time, man, when I started playing, and you had a little bit more of a tighter cluster of kingdoms. Granted, there was less kingdoms open at the time. Now, the idea of your new kingdom becoming an Imperium Kingdom, it's very realistic and very doable that it could happen. So I like that because the accessibility, the opportunity to do so is there. And it doesn't come across as though, oh, well, I have to be in an older kingdom that's been around for 2 years in order to do something like that. So that, to me, I actually think is a very appealing feature of the game when you look at it from that perspective. Then we have the number one kingdom, right, 1960 at 30.68 billion. Number 32 on the bubble is 24, that's 1916, 24.66, or I guess maybe I should say 30.69 if I want to be, rounding for specific purposes. 24.66 billion. You have a 6.02 billion gap between the number 1 Imperium and the number 32 Imperium. Now, to me, I mean, you could make the argument that's one alliance, one full alliance, maybe 3/4 of an alliance worth, maybe even half, depending on the kingdoms that you're in. But that gap does, I'd love to hear a comment on this, if you think that's a wide gap or not. personally, I don't think it's that bad. But because I don't have any historical data to go off of for what the gap between 1 and 32 has been, let's just say going back, a couple months, maybe a year, to look at if that has changed or what the fluctuation for the plus minus is. To me, this seems like it's average. I don't know if I want to say it's great or it's awful, but to me, this seems as though it would be average. Then we get to the next stat, right? So you have a couple outlier kingdoms here. There's only 4 kingdoms currently from the top 32 that have these specific numbers of alliances in their zone 3, right? You got 10, 8, 7, and 2, right? And I'll show you these right here. And then where's my 2? So starting at the highest, 1185 has 10 alliances in zone 3. They're the number 17, so they're basically right there middle of the pack. You have 8 alliances at the number 31 position for 1002, right? They're very close to the bubble. You have 7 alliances in Kingdom 1307. They're the number 2 ranked Imperium Kingdom, right? Or number 2, arguably strongest kingdom. And then you have 2, which is 1302, right? They're number 5. And I want to point this out because I think what's funny to me is I'll often hear people talk about how, you can't have more than 3 or more than 4 alliances in zone 3. It's too much, right? And here is kind of proof to the pudding that you can have strong kingdoms, even in Imperium, that have more than 5, 6 alliances in zone 3. And regardless, again, we're not doing deep dives on the kingdoms to see kind of how the structure and the logistics work and, how's morale currently, right? Are there any hurdles or challenges they're facing? But we're just simply talking about most of these kingdoms have been around for a while. So to see this amount of alliances in their zone 3 is something that I think kind of proves what other people who feel that you just shouldn't have, or, why would you have that many alliances, right? It shows that, hey, these kingdoms have been around for a while. They have this amount of alliances in them, which means that they didn't just do it overnight. They've been there for a while. And they are still, either you could argue, maintaining power, retaining power, but they're staying there as a top kingdom, even if we're just looking at it from a power to number of alliances comparison, right? Without doing any deep dives. So to me, I find that fascinating because I am more of a believer, for those of you who've watched some of my previous videos, that I like the idea of having more alliances in Zone 3. I believe that for the purposes of player engagement and for player retention purposes. Regardless of if others maybe feel that way, I personally think these things are very important when we're looking at how you can sustain activity for an elongated period of time. With that in mind, now that we kind of break down, before we show you some examples of the kingdoms, right, let's break down some of the percentages here. So you can see 6 alliances, right? So I broke everything down, excluding these 4, right? So we're kind of going off of, we're still going off of 32, technically, and the percentages would be whatever it's left. So we have this 6, 5, and 4. This defines how many alliances are in Zone 3. So for kingdoms that have 6 alliances in Zone 3, they round out 5 out of 32, right? 16% from the top 32. For 5 alliances in Zone 3, they come out to 7 out of 32, right? So there's 7 kingdoms out of 32 that have 5 alliances. They make up 22%. You have 4 alliances in Zone 3 in 11 kingdoms out of 32. They make up 34%, the largest. Then you have 3 alliances in Zone 3. They make up 4 out of 32 imp kingdoms and come out to 13% of the total 32. So, again, it goes to show you that there is a range. Sure, you can make the argument that 4 and 5 are probably more of the higher percentage choices that we see within the top 32, but you can still see that kingdoms with more than 5 still have high positions on the top 32 boards, right? Some within the top 5. And, again, you can see that here as your outliers, right? Number 2 and number 7, right? Have 6 or more alliances. So that's something really cool to see. And for me, again, I just love kind of showing off these stats. So before we finish, let's show you just a couple kingdoms here that I think would be really cool and enjoyable to take a look at. So let's do this. Let's start off with 1254. And we're going to show 1254 specifically because they have, at the moment, 5 alliances and 5 touching, and they have equal zone 3 distribution, right? So again, I'm always a fan of, giving some love here. So you can see, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that arguably, now you can, argue some semantics kind of, here and there, but they are very close in distribution when you look at territory, right? So this is something really cool that I wanted to show off. Now let's take a look at a kingdom like 1185. I think that's the one here. Right, so you can look at 1185, where they have, I think this is the one that has 10 alliances, and then I'll show you another example of one that maybe has kind of low LT ratio, touching to not. So here's one you can see where they currently have, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? They have 4 alliances that are touching LT, but you can see that there's a lot of other colors that are still in zone 3. So there's not an equal distribution of territory for the amount they have, but they have a lot of alliances that are also in zone 3. And that can just partially be to also try and keep player retention, which is something as well, engagement higher, and something that can lead to, I still think, more benefits, more pros than cons, just depending on how things are ran there, but just to kind of show you a different example. Then we get to a kingdom, and here I'll show you kind of, let's look at the opposite side. So now let's look at a kingdom like 1302. And this is somewhat, I see this pretty often in kingdoms as well. And I'd love to maybe go through this and do like a larger pool. Maybe we look at a data set of 100 or 500 kingdoms or something like that. And we look at, kind of how they have their things set up, or their zone 3 setup. And here's kind of more of a half and half, right? You got your yin and yang, your 50-50 split here, kind of 2 kingdoms for 1302, right? So that's kind of another way of looking at a complete opposite or different approach to how you might distribute your zone 3. So yeah, that I think pretty much kind of covers, kind of the high spectrum, the low spectrum, and then kind of the middle ground. And again, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback, your thoughts, anything that comes to mind based on the data that we showed, what we're showing in here. And also, and if I pose a question to you, what is a interesting data set or something that you'd love or you've always wondered, right? And I'll see if maybe I can make that happen. Let me know in the comments down below. That is it for me. Until next time, I'll catch y'all later.